Hello and welcome to another Cliff Reviews Art House. This time I'm reviewing the film Life is Not a Competition But I'm Winning, directed by Fuhr Mann. So this is a documentary that primarily explores the issues around participation in elite sports for transgender and non-binary athletes. This seems to have been released to coincide with the Paris Olympics, at least in the UK. As it turns out, it's even more timely than it could have been expected. I actually watched this film on the day that the Olympic boxing became totally dominated by the controversy around two women boxing in the women's competition. As far as I can see, the full details haven't been released, which has meant that people have voiced all kinds of opinions about whether these two fighters are actually women, some of which are clearly based on misconceptions. This feels, therefore, like a really needed documentary. The coverage of the women boxers in the Olympics has been very much from the perspective of their competitors. Little regard seems to have been given to their feelings or their experience. This meant that I really appreciated the documentary for giving me an insight into the issues surrounding gender identity within the context of sports, and that it provides an insight into the challenges faced by transgender and non-binary athletes. The personal stories of these athletes is really interesting and illuminating. It did feel intimate and very authentic. This isn't made as a conventional documentary, however. Rather, it's a kind of dreamy poem. The advantage of this is that it never feels didactic. It's an artwork, really, built around the stories of a group of athletes affected by these issues. As has been clear with the Olympic boxing controversy, these issues are not straightforward, and the documentary doesn't really explore any answers to the issues. It's not really providing a balanced view in any way. But I'm not saying this as a criticism. I think it's a strength of the film that it's giving us an insight into the perspective of these athletes. And this feels like something that we sorely need. I saw a comment from Julia in an interview that they reject the basic idea of competitive sports, that it's a patriarchal concept creating hierarchy. Interestingly, when I say that the film doesn't provide any answers to the problem, I was left at the end of this combined experience of the documentary and the media coverage of the Olympic boxing controversies with a feeling that perhaps elite competitive sport is problematic in itself. So maybe that answer is inherent in Julia's film. These were the things that I really liked about the film. Some of the information given from the perspective of it being a documentary makes a really strong point. And I liked the creativity of taking the athletes to the Olympic stadiums in Berlin and Athens. This gave the documentary an element of performance art and a connection to sometimes a troubled history. The film does have a compelling aesthetic quality to it at times, not all the time, but it does have that kind of poetic and quite visually arresting feel. I also loved the insertion of some of the contemporary athletes into archive footage. This was one of the most effective things in the film, I think. It felt like a collaboration between today and the people of yesterday. It provided a kind of unity, a solidarity between members of this community from the past and the present. I looked up some other work by Julia and I watched two short films, Riot Not Diet and A Mother's Love. Although both definitely have a kind of queer, gender, body agenda, these are not documentaries. They're short artworks and I really like them. It made me realise that I don't necessarily understand the language of clear cinema, so I'm certainly not offering this as a definitive critique of Life is Not a Competition. That said, I want to understand this language, so I present the critique in the context of how it reads to an interested cis male. This makes me think of another film that I reviewed a while back, The African Desperate, that I just didn't connect with at all, and I was fairly negative in my review about it. Perhaps I just don't understand the language of the filmmaker. I'm always ready to accept that. Of course, we can only bring our own perspective to films, but I always think it's important to realise that my experience and reading of a film may completely miss what the filmmaker intended, but the others will pick up. Overall, I think this film is a really worthwhile watch, both from the perspective of its poetry and the story that it tells, and the information that it communicates. According to their website, Julia is currently working on a feature, a revenge fantasy on patriarchy, and I'll certainly be keeping my eye out for that. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.